what we have for you, I think, is quite an extraordinary moment. The debate we're calling liberal and illiberal, but we have two quite extraordinary people to discuss this with us. First, Maria Schmidt, who's a Hungarian historian and university lecturer. She's been a commissioner of government, very much involved in the interpretation and reinterpretation of the 1956 revolution, which is actually a really interesting moment in Hungarian life. And the debate over the past, which is always vivid and angry, is part of what brings Viktor Orban to power. And Maria might be able to explain that better than me. She was very involved with the setting up of a museum in Budapest called the House of Terror, which is about what happened under Soviet occupation, and has been an important, sometimes controversial voice in explaining Hungary, its past and its present to the rest of the world. And speaking on the other side of the debate is Ivan Krastev, who's originally Bulgarian, who is a political economist, scientist, philosopher. He's chairman of something called the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia, which will give you some idea of which side of the debate he's on. He's a permanent fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna. I find him one of the most thought-provoking people I talk to. He's very generous with his time. He has a recent book, nice short book called After Europe, which deals with the impact of migration and what it's done to Europe and the European Union. So I'm just going to start them off with a very simple question, I think. And is it possible to have an illiberal democracy, which is what Hungary calls itself? Is it possible to have an illiberal democracy without authoritarianism? That's my first question. Maria, why don't you start, and then I'll try to stay out of the way.
I think that Hungary is a democracy. Illiberalism is an attempt to get emancipation and to safeguard our sovereignty. And 2014, when Viktor Orban announced that he is going to build an illiberal democracy, that was a sign that he will not go further with this copy-paste policy of the West, but try to find an own path to be successful in the 21st century.
Yvonne, do you want to respond?
First, because they put here the chair, so I don't know how we're part of the discussion or part of the entertainment. Entertainment. So
Yeah.
let's then start with the joke before telling what I'm going to tell. And the joke is the following. Two experts meet, and one asks the other, do you understand what is going on in the world? And the other said, let's explain you. And the first said, I also can explain. I'm asking, do you understand? And I do believe that part of the story is, for me, democracy is the regime in which government can lose elections. So we don't know. From this point of view, this is quite important because the major question is, for example, if you're going to talk about Mr. Kaczynski, he lost elections. He allowed basically to be defeated in an argument and so on. His political competition is going to prevail in a situation in which you create an atmosphere that if the other party is going to win, this is the end of the world. I do believe this is changing. So from this point of view, we are not talking simply institutions. We are not talking simply kind of an elements. When democracy is going to be understood in the terms of the civil war, you start to believe that allowing the other side to win is something that you cannot allow. And this is where basically, in my view, basic problem with the idea of illiberalism.
Are you speaking on the United States of America or what?
No, I'm speaking about many things. Listen, I'm speaking about Turkey, I'm speaking about Brazil, I'm speaking about the situation in which we emotionally get in. Because one of the things that I found particularly important is the following. For me, the major question of any liberal democracy is why you believe that your domestic political opponent is less dangerous for you than the external enemy. Do you remember in 1848, they have a poster in France when the universal suffrage came. And the poster was a worker who has a rifle in one hand and ballot in the other. And the message was, ballot for the class enemy, bullet for the national enemy. I do believe, in talking about the United States, I basically believe that President Trump believes that the real enemy are the Democrats, and from this point of view, all other Chinese, Russians, Ukrainians could be an allies. And this is a major change, and this is why I don't believe it's simply about one leader or the other leader, but democracy cannot function if you believe that your major enemy is your opponent at home, basically somebody with whom you compete politically.
So we are right now in an election campaign. Sunday there will be local elections, and the opposition believes strongly that they're gonna win it. I believe they will lose it, but I mean they are open chances for the opposition also to win an election. Yeah. So what you said, it's very important. Because in the case of Hungary, we have a very, very weak opposition. You cannot take them seriously. And therefore, the foreign policy became much more important and much more interesting as it should have been. Normally, people are not so much interested in foreign questions. It's not that they think it will put an impact of their everyday life.
So if I can then summarize this, the problem is that the Hungary opposition is so weak that in order to mobilize society, you need kind of an external enemy, right?
Yes.
Like Brussels, yeah.
But Brussels is very interested in playing that role, so it's okay.
And also migrants, right? I mean, that's the external enemy. That's what Orban's been going on about. That's what Kaczynski's been going on about, right? Which is the outsiders coming in and destroying our way of life.
I know. I want to start because for me, nobody can understand the position of Central and Eastern Europe in general about migration if they're not going to understand the roots of demographic anxiety in the region. Listen, Central and Eastern Europe is the region in the world that is the fastest shrinking in demographic terms. My own country, Bulgaria, is the fastest demographically shrinking country in the human history in the absence of war and famine. There were 9 million people living in Bulgaria in 1989. There's 7 million now, and there are going to be 5.7 who are going to live according to the UN projections in 2040. So the paradox of Central and Eastern Europe is that we talk about migrants who are not there. Just one data which you're going to enjoy. The number of the Hungarians, according to the opinion polls, who declared that they have personally seen unidentified flying objects is higher than those who believe that they have personally met a refugee. But on the other side, there is a problem. But out-migration is the thing that we don't know how to talk about. You have depopulation. And I do believe from this point of view, it's extremely important to understand that most of the time, and this is not only Hungary, it's true for Bulgaria, it's true for Poland, when people talk migration, they talk not so much the fear of the migrants who has never come, this is the fear of your own living. For the last 10 years, Romania lost 3.4 million people. It's a country of 20 million. 10,000 doctors has left Romania for the last 2 years. And this kind of a major demographic changes created this fear of shrinking numbers. You have a small nations that they do believe that they're going to disappear. And this was a very kind of a major substitution of a real fear, the fear of depopulation and people leaving, with the fear of the foreigners coming, because honestly speaking, I didn't see many foreigners basically dying to come to our countries, at least, yeah.
Not even for the tomatoes.
Hungarian is a difficult language. This is the reason.
But there are two more things I fully agree. But two more things for Hungary. One's history. We were 150 years under Muslim occupation. We don't want to repeat it. That's one thing. Secondly, 400,000 illegal migrants went through Hungary because of the decisions by the German Chancellor. And this is a sovereignty issue. We do not want to allow that the German Chancellor make decisions instead of us, without even asking us. That was the heart of the questions. Why should we behave in the way she not even asked our opinion?
But I mean, this is part of what's interesting to have both of you here from Central and Eastern Europe, because Brussels has become this thing. And one reason it's become this thing is because of what you just said. It's true in Poland, too. There's a sense that somehow Germany decides and everyone else has to go along, and Germany dominates Brussels. That's the cliche, that's the idea. But also it's the sense that our best people are emigrating outward. They're emigrating to the world of Brussels, this sort of West European established world. Isn't that part of the problem?
It is. Listen, 1989 revolution has one very specific feature. The key word was normality. We wanted to be like the West. We wanted to be the West. So from this point of view, I'm not very much buying the colonization discourse, because basically it was, if it was a colonialism, it was colonialism on demand.
Yeah.
And also after every revolution, people are leaving countries. But normally this is the defeated party that is leaving. This was the white Russians who left Russia after 1917. It was the white French after the French Revolution. Why they're leaving? Because the revolutionaries want to live in the future. So if the future of Poland is Germany, you should not be surprised that in the 1990s, the liberals were the first one to go to Germany. Because you want to experience this new life, to study, to do this and this. And we end up with this strange situation in which freedom of movement within the EU is the best that happened to us, and also the thing that we fear most. And this is why we don't have the language. I agree with you on the German, but I have one footnote to say. I understand that there is a huge problem when Germany, during the financial crisis, was telling everybody, follow the rules. Don't give money to Greece and so on, and then during the migration crisis said, let's do it. But on the other side, the way Hungary and Poland and all of our countries said, no, we're going to get nobody. We are not interested in it at all. This total lack of compassion, which was not about Germany, because there were not Germans coming in, I do believe this created this impression of totally egoistic people who really care about nobody, particularly keeping in mind that Hungarians have been emigrating after 1956, Czechs have been emigrating after 1968, Poles have been emigrating after 1980, and they were refugees themselves. And I do believe this was also the legitimate point of Orban policy to the Germans, listen, you should talk to us when you decide, was very much, in my view, dismissed by the language on which he was starting to talk about the migration issue, which was brutal.
Yes, I would add two things. So the admiration of Central Europe towards the West disappeared in 2008. We did everything what they demanded us to do. We did everything what they asked us to do. And now we are in the abyss, and they are not going to help us out. So that was a shock for us. That if we follow their path, we ended up in the abyss. And that was the financial crisis. We lost our task in the policy of the Western world. And then we had to help ourselves out from this situation in Hungary, which we did. We did in an extra politics where we wanted the banks, we wanted the global companies to pay extra taxes and share the burdens of these heavy losses we had in 2008. And we were attacked by the Western press very much, and by the Germans also. Now in 2015, if they said, okay, these are these people who we don't know who they are, we will respect their rights to get asylum, but they also have to respect our way of demanding documents, passports, fingertips, and so on, and they refused. They had a photo in their hands where Merkel was on, and they demanded that we accept this photo as their passport into Europe.
I mean, but there was also this question of Islamophobia that came up too, which was a challenge to our so-called Christian way of life and our, right? I mean, this is part of the issue, even in countries like Hungary, that were transit countries. People weren't staying in Hungary, they were moving through Hungary, or they were trying to.
Listen, one of the things also, in my view, to understand is the following. Go back to the map, ethnic map of Europe in the year 1900. And you're going to see two Europes. One was quite ethnically homogeneous, and this was Western Europe, France, Germany. The other was very culturally and ethnically diverse, and this was the Central and Eastern Europe, the Habsburg Europe. And then you have two world wars, forceful exchange of people, and at the end of the day, now if you see the ethnic map of Europe, you're going to see two Europes. One is much more culturally and ethnically diverse, and this is Western Europe, and one which is totally ethnically homogeneous, and this is Central and Eastern Europe. I'm just going to give you the comparison between Hungary and Austria. Countries basically the same side, next to each other, sharing quite a lot of history with the exception of the last 50 years. Do you know that Austrian citizens not born in Austria is a higher percent than the American citizens not born in the United States? Do you know that 50% of basically every school kids in the Vienna schools do not have German as a first language? So one of the strange stories about Central and Eastern Europe is that ethnic homogeneity makes us totally hysterical and nostalgic. We are afraid of people coming. And by the way, this is an issue because this cannot be sustained for a long time. Do you know which is the European country that got most labor migrants for the last 3 years? Poland. Poland. And it's not only Ukrainians, but it is Pakistani, even there are others, because Central and Eastern Europe has a major labor shortages. This created a major crisis in Hungary with the prices. And this is the story. My problem with the kind of illiberal vision is it's totally nostalgic. The idea is let's go back where we were, but it's not easy to go back where we were.
I'm not sharing this last word. We are not nostalgic, but it's a great trauma for Hungary. What happened 100 years ago after the First World War, when Western countries decided we should be homogeneous. It was not our free will. That was a decision by them. Then that was a decision after the Second World War. We should make this communist experiment for half a century. It was not by the will of the Hungarian people. It was forced upon us. After the Second World War, all countries who wanted to become communist were not allowed to do. Greece, Italy, France. But those countries who did not want to become communist, we had to be. Like Poland, like Bulgaria, like Hungary. Now, after 100 years, the same countries who did that to us came and say, no, we have another thought. You should be multicultural and multi-ethnic. We are fed up with that. We are sovereign countries. We want to be sovereign, and we want to decide by our own whom he wants to live together. That should be a sovereign decision.
Yeah, I agree very much. And this is an interesting story because my major argument starts from the following. Listen, George Steiner, the famous cultural critic, used to say, trees has roots, people has legs, which means people are moving. The movement of people is going to be, in my view, the most important political factor that we are going to see in the next 30 and 40 years for a very simple reason. We are living in the world which is very much interconnected, but where for the first time everybody knows how the others are living. In 1980s, when the World Value Survey started, there was no positive correlations between happiness and economic development. 20 years later, very strong correlations. In 1980, Nigeria was as happy as West Germany. In 2000, Nigeria was as happy as their GDP is going to predict. Do you know what has changed? Simply Nigeria's got televisions. They can see how West Germans are living. And I'm saying this because as a result of it, we are going to see a revolution which is going to be very much an exit revolution. If you're a young person, somewhere in a corrupt and underdeveloped country, and you want to change your life, it's much more reasonable to try to change the country than to try to change the government. And this is going to create, of course, totally different political dynamics. It's going to be individual decisions. And of course, from this point of view, Central and Eastern Europe has a choice. I agree with you. By the way, we can make the Japanese choice. People are talking that the Japanese decided that they prefer robots to foreigners, and they're ready to lose their kind of economic part of their, for example, economic welfare in order to be just on their own. The problem for us is that we are not on an island, and this is a real issue. How easy is it going to be for the European Union to go if different countries are making different choices, but at the same time we have a freedom of movement?
How I see these things is, for my understanding, the 20th century had 100 years of war from the beginning of the First World War until 1990. And now we have to overcome these wars. The first time is in the last years that the Central European countries could speak to each other because of the peace agreements. We could not speak to each other for 100 years. It's a big development, positive development for us. Also with the other countries, south of Hungary, Serbia, Croatia, and so on. We had quite bad relationship because of this peace. That was not a peace, because of these dictates. Now, what we have to think is, could we get a treatment from the western part of the European Union which is speaking to us on eye level, not from above, eye level, eye to eye. Then we could be partners, but we will not do anymore. We will not repeat these last 30 years anymore, that they dictate us and we do what they want us to do. That is finished.
Because, I mean, one of the interesting things, maybe, Yvonne, you thought of this, but I think of Thomas Bagger, who's a German diplomat and kind of a barbarian handler for the German government, right? He deals with English speakers and so on. But one of the points he was trying to make about 89 is Western Europe misinterpreted part of what happened in 89, that we saw 89 as a victory of liberal democracy, that communism was over, and that now Central and Eastern Europe could join us. While for many people in Central and Eastern Europe, 89 was a liberation, there's no question, but it was a chance to restore sovereignty, to restore nationhood, and not to throw themselves into this soup of West European Union. You know, European Union had its values and it's had its benefits, but it has, as you were just saying, for the people of the region, some of the people in the region, they feel dictated to in terms of how they're supposed to live and how they're supposed to believe. But Maria, I do want to ask you this. Can Hungary protect itself in the way that you want it to be protected and not be an illiberal democracy?
I think that what is very important to understand what happened 30 years ago. For us, it was an anti-communist revolution against the communists. We won. It was a national revolution. We won. And an independence war. We won. If the West accept this and understand this, we can begin to talk to each other. I think Hungary is very committed member of the NATO. We are very committed for the transatlantic relationship. We have problems with Western Europe because their relationship to the United States of America is sometimes much too critical for us. We are much more pro-American than they are in the Western world. And I think that democracy is very important for us because 45 years long we did not have one. We appreciate democracy and freedom, freedom of speech. Therefore, we do not accept political correct canon. That does not exist in Hungary. We want to keep freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and every freedom. We are free people. We fought a lot all the times for freedom.
Just 2 points. On one, I do believe where you're right is that 1989 was very different than 1945 in Western Europe. 1945 was perceived as the collapse of nationalistic aspirations as the result of the war. In 1989, nationalists were part of the victorious coalition against communism. If you go to Solidarity back then, you're going to see the liberal wing and you're going to see the nationalist wing, and they believed that they're against communism, which was perceived as internationalist. The interesting question is why in 1990s you cannot hear this nationalism. By the way, if you go on the opinion polls, you're going to be surprised how much this nationalistic sentiment was there, but there was no voice. And the reason was the Yugoslav wars. We are pretending, and Roger is here, that Yugoslav wars has disappeared. But the Yugoslav wars took the nationalistic discourse outside of the nationalists because then nationalism was in a coalition with the ex-communists, Milosevic, and so on, so they didn't have a language. The sentiment was there, but they didn't have a language. Where I do believe is our difference on sovereignty issue is the following. I agree with you that in all of our countries, there is the idea to assert our own identity and difference, but this is also used by governments to say that any control and check and balances, even within the country, is going to be destroyed because this is a resistance. So you have a kind of a total idea that sovereignty means unchecked executive power. This is, for example, is this the problem of, to what extent, if you believe that media should be put under control because some of the publishers are not Hungarian publishers, and it's about every country, so I don't want to spend. The same goes with the constitutional courts and others. I'm afraid that every executive power, this is true everywhere in the world, does not like to be controlled. But the idea that we are basically going to resist external pressure is doing this. Because yes, there is an external pressure in Romania for corruption, but to be honest, it is a corrupt country with a corrupt government. This is also true. So does it mean that our national sovereignty means that we should not fight corruption because otherwise we are going to lose sovereignty? For me, this is part of the dilemma all of us are facing.
I think that in every country you can find corruption. It's nothing special. But
some of us are doing better than others.
Yes, yes, but it is used against the Central and Eastern European countries as a weapons. It's not used against Austria, which is the most corrupt country I ever known, or the Germany or other France, where in the 19th century it was a habit to buy pieces in the newspapers and so on. So but the case in Hungary is, one thing is for sure, illiberalism is foreign policy. Because Orban, since 2010, and since in that period, he won 3 times supermajority, he did not dismantle the liberal structure of the revolution of 1990. Every single institution remained. That was nothing dismantled or disappeared. So
but there was a move to control them, not to dismantle.
But after 3 times of supermajority, who should the parliament is choosing the judges for the constitutional court, like in the United States of America. They also want to have their own people. So what is the problem with it? If we do it in Hungary through the parliament, it's a problem. If the United States of America do it through the Congress, it's not a problem. So I just want this double standard that we should not do it anymore. We are also grown-up persons, 30 years old. Children are also grown-up, so we had 30 years in democracy. Please, accept it.
Just one footnote. I agree that basically it's not on some countries to tell the others. But it's also true that if the election law was not changed between 2010 and 2014, with the votes that Mr. Orban get on the second elections, he was going to have a majority, but not a constitutional majority. You agree with this?
No, that was the old rules in 2010.
No, but my is he got constitutional majority absolutely right after 2010 elections.
Yes.
And then there was a change in the electoral law that makes kind of a strong bias for the strongest party. This was, as a result of it, with the same vote that he get in 2014, he was going to win comfortably the elections, but the seats which he's going to get, if it was the old election system, is not going to give him constitutional majority. You agree on this?
Yes, but so, in the last election, he would get it.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're kind of running out of time, but I just want to ask Ivan one last question, if that's okay, because is Hungary a special case, or is it a model? Does it begin to be a model? You can see how Poland uses some of the examples, but does it spread beyond that, or is it a sort of moment in history?
Listen, in my view, there's three different levels. First, there is a general trend, illiberal trend, which cannot be just got to Central and Eastern Europe, because Brazilians were not imitating Orban. At the same time, of course, Hungary is in a very difficult and different situation because of the constitutional majority that Viktor Orban get in 2010. And the third difference is that unlike many others, which are just being happy to have this kind of regime at home but not talk much about it, the difference is the ambition of Viktor Orban basically to position himself as a model. He made this famous statement 2 years ago in which he said, for the last 25 years, West was the model. Now we are the model. So from this point of view, this is what makes Hungary different. But if we're going basically to talk about what Central and Eastern Europe really imitates, first of all, I don't believe that we ever have been imitating Russia or the United States. It's unrealistic, it's a small country. It's much more the Israeli Netanyahu model that basically was coming. And this is a highly polarized politics with the idea of the majority, which dominates. The only difference is that in Israel, some of the independent institutions are strong enough, particularly courts. So you're going to see a lot of Israeli prime ministers moving directly from the cabinet office to the prisons. In Central and Eastern Europe, basically, we're not going so much to allow the courts to take such an important decisions.
Great. Well, on that complicated and happy note, I just want to thank you both and thank you all for your patience. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.
Thank you.